Great. Thanks, Summer. Brilliant. So welcome everyone to our second People Team Masterclass series. The topic of today's session is the growth mindset, and we've got a truly unique and fascinating way to bring this topic to life through hand analysis. I'm delighted to introduce Lawrence Rook, who is our key speaker today. Lawrence is one of the UK's leading hand analysis through over 15 years of professional experience. Lawrence gives readings for self-development, business, careers, relationship advice. So it's truly going to guide us through this topic from a really unique standpoint. Just a matter of logistics, if you could all stay on mute during today's session. We do have a question and answer session at the end, but any questions that do take your fancy, obviously please do pop them in the chat, and we'll be using the chat function throughout the session as well. So just really looking at the learning objectives of today's session, it's really important that by the end of today's session, we all understand the contrast between the fixed and the growth mindset, really recognizing the benefits and embracing a growth mindset, applying hand analysis, which is Chirology, to cultivating that growth mindset in ourselves and others, and really harnessing Chirology for our own self-awareness, talent discovery, personal and professional development. So without further ado, delighted to hand over to Lawrence.
Thank you very much, Laura. Let me just get the screen to move. Brilliant. Right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. So in this presentation, I'm going to run through what the growth mindset is to start with. And from there, we're going to dive into chirology, which is the world of hand analysis. And I'm going to be linking all of these things together. So first of all, let's talk about the growth mindset. So the growth mindset is a very well-established psychological construct. It was coined by a lady called Carol Dweck and popularized in the mid-2000s. And what the growth mindset is it's the internal belief that there is potential for personal growth and improvement and development through one's own attributes. The fixed mindset, conversely, is when somebody believes that their abilities or skills or intelligence is innate and it's locked and it's unchangeable. So the growth mindsets fosters seeing room for growth and challenges as opportunities, whereas the fixed mindset is much more reductive and rigid and ends up closing doors in the face of opportunities, potentially. So how your mindsets shape your belief and actions. So, of course, the mindset we have will influence our beliefs, which will then in turn influence our behavior, which will then obviously influence our actions. So the mindset that we're holding is really very important. So how chirology, which is biometric hand analysis, how does this link to the growth mindset? So what chirology is it's a phenomenal tool for self-understanding, and all of this I'm going to get into in much more detail later on. Chirology embraces individuality. It encourages the maximizing of our strengths. It addresses challenges for personal growth, and it promotes self-awareness and self-improvement, and recognizes the adaptability that we have for change. Similarly, the growth mindset values uniqueness and authenticity, and it leverages strength for personal growth. It views challenges as opportunities, and it advocates continuous improvement and adaptability. And so fundamentally, and in essence, chirology and the growth mindset, they share the common ground of promoting self-awareness and self-acceptance and the recognition of one's own unique qualities. And they both adhere to this commitment of personal growth. Both perspectives empower individuals to take control of their development, and they foster a positive outlook on learning, change, and self-development. So before we delve into chirology now, I just want to give a couple of examples of the growth mindset so people can understand how this can be applied. So with the growth mindset, one wants to be thinking about their skills, their talents, and their limitations as all things that have got boundaries that can be moved. And we can always maximize and continue to grow in any area. And the growth mindset doesn't just apply to something with ourselves, it also applies to people in relations with us, or to our people in a workplace, or to our children. And for example, you can foster the growth mindset in and around other people. So if a child does an amazing drawing and they show it to you, the growth mindset can be fostered by encouraging the talents, by encouraging the effort and the dedication someone's made to something, rather than just acknowledging the talents and the innate skill. So if someone does a drawing and it's a child and they say, look at this drawing, to foster the growth mindset, one can praise the effort, and they can say something like, you do great things when you try, and when you put your mind to it, you can achieve anything. And this, of course, is a very growth mindset fostering process. So the world of chirology, let's dive in. So this is going to take some explaining this subject, and it's very interesting, and there's going to be lots of examples that I'm going to go through, and lots of places where you can look at your own hands and see what's going on. So to start with, chirology. So the word literally means the study of the hand. And if we go back in time, every ancient culture has got some form of hand analysis, be it the ancient Greeks or ancient India, and right the way back to Sumer and the ancient Egyptians. So the hands have always been this area of interest in various cultures over the centuries. In the 19th century, the empirical foundations for hand analysis really came about, and this is when the hand started to be looked at more scientifically. And then as we move further into the 20th century, research on the hands started to involve looking at the dermatoglyphics, which are the fingerprints, and then things like the lines and the nails. And this correlated with the interest in psychology, and the hand started to be looked at in relation to one's psyche and with what's going on in one's mind. And so today, when we talk about chirology or hand analysis, we're talking about a holistic system of self-understanding. So there's lots of science behind chirology, and it kind of breaks down into different areas, really. So the hands are very linked to the brain, which is why the hands are an area of interest for this kind of study. So a larger part of the motor cortex goes to the hands than any other part of the body. So there's this huge amount of brain activity that goes straight to the hands. The size and shape of the hands are generally related to hormones and genetics. The lines on the hand are actually caused by the nervous system, which is a very interesting thing, which I'll get into a bit later. And then the fingerprints actually have the same origin as the brain, and they come from what's called the same ectodermal layer of skin. So the fingerprints are actually formed of the same substance as our brain. And then again, in terms of scientific research, there's all sorts of scientific studies, tens of thousands that have been done in the area of fingerprints, which is the technical word is dermatoglyphics, and lots of correlates to do with physical and mental health conditions. And then some people here might have heard of the digit ratio, or the finger lengths, and this relates to the index and third finger in relation to estrogen and testosterone. So lots of research here. And then, of course, palmar lines, which, as I've briefly mentioned, are actually related to the nervous system. So here's an example of this. So on the left here, we have the hand of a 65-year-old female, and we can see that the hand is really quite clear. Now, a lot of people's hands in the audience will have kind of these clear, well-formed lines and a lot of space. And then a few people in the audience will have hands that look more like this. And this is the hand here of a 21-year-old female. And we can see that the lines on the hand aren't caused by creasing. They're caused by the nervous system. So what we can see is that there's a lot more excitation and excitable energy within this 21-year-old's hand. And as a result, there'll be lots more things that should be more predisposed to, and a lot of areas which that energy could be channeled in for it to be really productive. But this is just an example of how the lines are really not related to any real physical movement. Equally, another question that I get asked a lot is, do the lines change? And yes, they absolutely do. So just again, to give a brief example here, we've got the hands of the same person 2 years apart. And what we can see is that this person actually went through quite a stressful experience. And that amount of stress we can now see as showing on the hands. There's a lot of stress lines cutting through here. There's a lot of activity around here, which kind of relates to the gut and digestion area. So maybe this person in 2018 is feeling more taxed and tired than what they were 2 years ago. But that's just an example of how the lines change. Okay, now I'm going to start breaking this down, and people can start looking at their own hands and thinking about what kind of elements they might fall into. Now, bringing this back to the growth mindset, all of these different hand elements have got more intrinsic qualities and intrinsic talents and skills that might come more naturally to each hand shape. However, there's always going to be a flip side to the coin, which would need to be worked on. And that is where the growth mindset can come in. Because you see, if someone has got a square palm with short fingers, this would be known as an earth element hand. And this is an extremely enduring, practical, sturdy, grounded, reliable type. But in having all of these qualities, they could also be quite immovable, quite stubborn, and quite blunt sometimes. So the growth mindset perspective for the earth hand would be to be able to be aware of those limitations and put forth into practice things that will help them move past any inhibitants. An air hand has got the square palm with longer fingers. And as the fingers get longer, someone becomes more analytical and the communication skills get enhanced. So people with air hands live in the world of thought and analysis, and are very good at commerce and very good at looking at things in fine detail and analyzing and picking things apart. The challenge for an air hand is that they can be a little bit devoid of emotion because they live so much in the world of analysis and are very cerebral. So then the growth mindset perspective from an air hand would be finding ways to get in touch with their emotions, engage emotionally in something, and not be entirely in the world of thought. The fire hand is a narrow palm, and the narrower the palm, the more influenced by an environment someone is. So the fire hand has a narrow palm, which means stimulation is going to affect them. The shorter fingers on a fire hand mean that they're going to be quite spontaneous and quite impulsive. So a fire hand type needs a lot of change. They need a lot of excitement. They need a lot of challenge. And in a business sense, a fire hand is by far the most competitive type. From a growth mindset perspective, the fire hand needs to find ways in which they can wind down, relax, and not burn themselves out. The water type hand is a narrow palm with long fingers. This is the most people-orientated type. It's the most feeling-orientated type. So water hands are very good at understanding, empathizing, connecting with people. And so from a growth mindset perspective, let's say if this water hand is in a business environment, they might have to work on their levels of assertion and their levels of competitiveness so as to be able to be on an equal field with the other types. So the next thing I would look at when I'm looking at hands, I'm going to bring this all together with some examples, and we're going to look at some famous people's hands quite soon, is the fingers. And what the fingers do is give a different energy and represent something different within how they're formed. So the index finger relates to our sense of self. It's kind of like our identity and how we see ourselves. It's also the finger of power, and it can relate to things like control and responsibility. So the larger the index finger, generally speaking, the larger the sense of control, the sense of responsibility, and the vision that one has for themselves. The middle finger relates to rules and structures. So someone with a very strong middle finger is very aware of rules and structures, and they can be very thorough. The third finger is about creativity. And when someone's got a very dominant third finger, they can have a higher performance side, or they can be a literal artist, or they can be somebody who has a very good eye for style or design or composition. The little finger is about communication. And when the little finger is very large, it gives someone really strong abilities in communication. This can be verbal communication or non-verbal communication. It also adds to someone's insight and perceptions. And lastly, the thumb is our willpower. So the bigger and stronger the thumb, the more determination, self-mastery, and drive someone's going to have. And of course, the same applies to all of these fingers in reverse. So if people have got one finger that's slightly shorter than all the others relatively, that would be an area that they would have to then work on and apply the growth mindset to. Very quickly, I'm not going to spend too much time on these, but we have another variable, and then these are the dermatoglyphics. So these are the fingerprints. So these are, roughly speaking, the different types of fingerprints we've got. And then depending on which finger the fingerprint is on, it's going to change the meaning. So you see, if we look at the world individualizes and intensifies whatever digit it's on. So if somebody's got a whirl on their ring finger, which is their creative finger, they're going to have a very intense individual style and sense of their own creativity. So they might be an artist, for example, or they might be a photographer, you see. Okay, so major lines. I'm going to run through this again quite quickly, but you can really start to look at your own hands with this now. So the line at the top of the hand is the emotion line. This is in blue here. So most people are going to have quite a that is the headline, and this runs horizontally, generally speaking, across the hand. The line that everyone's probably heard of is the lifeline around here, and this shows one's sense of stability and how grounded and stable they are. And then the fate line, or the life path line, shows our sense of direction and purpose. So let's have a look at some examples of these. The headline. Now, what the headline shows is the way in which you think. It's how we process information. It's how we see the world and how we translate what's going on around us. It also shows the way in which we think, really, and it gives us our viewpoint on what's going on around us. So there are two different examples of headlines here. Here, we've got a straight headline that's running right the way across the hand. And here, we've got a very curved headline that's dipping down to what's actually known as the subconscious area of the hand at the bottom here. Now, these two headlines are going to see the world in a very different way. A lot of people that I'm talking to now will have a very straight headline, and some people will have a curved headline. The straight headline shows that somebody sees things in a logical, analytical, and objective way. The curved headline is someone who sees things in a more imaginative, creative, instinctual, and artistic way. The straight headline is very common on people who work in logical jobs or that work in roles that require a lot of technical mental computation. So accountants or engineers and anything that involves that kind of logical structured planning side. And then it's very common to see creative people with curved headline, writers, artists, filmmakers, this sort of thing. And of course, if we find it on a businessman's hand, then we know that the businessman is going to be quite intuitive about how he thinks and the way in which he sees things. So we've got a few more here. So this is the headline length is another variable to think about. So if we look over here, this is actually a very short headline. If I circle that, and if we go over here, this is an extremely long headline. Now, there'll be about 2 or 3% of people that I'll be talking to that have a headline that cuts all the way across the hand like this. So again, this is going to show a completely different perspective and a completely different way in which each person thinks. The person with the short headline is going to be much more practically minded. They're going to be more focused in the here and now. They're going to see things in a more materialistic way, and they're going to be more concerned with seeing practical results. The longer headline is going to be more philosophical in the way in which they think. Their thinking is going to be more compulsive because they're not going to be able to stop. There's a huge mental processing power that's going on inside their head, and they're going to need a lot of mental challenge in order to keep them satisfied.
Lawrence, it's Alison. Can I ask a quick question, because I think people are wanting to follow on their hands. Question is, people are saying, does it matter which hand you look at when you're looking at your own hand?
Thanks, Alison. Yeah, that's a great question. So it does, absolutely. So if you're right-handed, the right hand is the hand you present to the outer world. So this is the hand, the right hand, that people in the office meet. It's the hand who you present when you're going into a public space. The left hand is the hand that people see, or excuse me, is the hand that represents your private self. So the left hand is who we are behind closed doors. And if our headlines are different, it means that we're going to have a different public way of thinking, way of expressing ourselves than what we have got internally. And so sometimes people's headlines can be really very different. And, you know, when I'm doing my private readings, we'll spend a lot of time looking at those differences and exploring how they manifest. So,
and does that change if you're left-handed versus right-handed?
It would do, absolutely, yeah. So then if somebody's left-handed, the opposite is true. They would generally lead with their left hand. So the way their headline is formed on their left hand would be how people know them. So what can happen is somebody can have a very clear, very well-formed headline on their outer hand, say their right hand, and everyone would know them as a very astute, clear-thinking person who's very sharp, very able to do lots of complicated mental tasks and very on it in a work environment. However, on their inner hand, they might have a much more fragmented headline, and this would show the inner stress that they might be experiencing during that time. And if it's only on their inner hand, generally speaking, people in the outer world aren't going to know it. So that's how those things can be different.
Great, thank you.
So if we look at this headline here, I would hedge a very large bet that there isn't anybody I'm speaking to today that's got a headline that looks like this, because this is actually a really poorly formed headline. It's extremely short, so it barely comes past the length of the first finger. It's very broken, so it's very scratchy, and there's no real defined line. So you see, this person here is going to really struggle getting any correct or accurate mental representation of what's going on for them. They're going to have little to no reflective skills where they're able to have a kind of meta-analysis of themselves in hindsight, and there's going to be an awful lot of mental confusion and anxiety. And this is the hand of somebody with quite severe schizophrenia. Now, if we compare it to this headline, this is a beautifully formed, really clear, crystallined headline. And maybe there'll be some people that I'm speaking to today that have got a headline like this. But what makes this headline exceptional is firstly the length. So it's a really long headline. So this is somebody that's going to be a really deep thinker. The longer the headline, the more somebody is going to be deep, analytical, and philosophical in the way in which they see things. There's a fork at the end, which means that there's versatility in how they think. And there's actually separation between the headline and the lifeline here, which means that somebody's able to think really outside the box. And the headline is slightly curved, which means that the person can be creative as well as logical. And this is the handprint of Albert Einstein. So we can see very clearly a marked difference in headlines there. So we're going to go on to the emotion line. Now, the emotion line is the line above the headline. It's the one just beneath the fingers. The emotion line shows how we feel. It's how we connect with people. It's like our emotional resonance. And it's the way in which we express ourselves. So, generally speaking, there are two types of emotion lines. And that's the straighter emotion line, which is here, or there's the curved emotion line, which is here. And the difference is that the straight emotion line tends to keep their feelings beneath the surface. So people can look at their own hands now and see whether the top line on their hand is very curved, going up towards the fingers, or if it's straight. And there are variations among this, so it's not binary. But when it's straight, this is what I would call the Scandinavian emotion line. It's people who can have feelings, but they generally don't express them. And in a working environment, this can be very productive, because what it means is that someone with a straight emotion line, they're not going to fly off the handle in a business meeting. They're always going to be able to keep a poker face. So that would be the positive of it. The growth mindset perspective relating it to self-development would be finding ways to express oneself more comfortably and finding ways in which one can express what they're feeling in real time, because that's the challenge for the straight heart line. When the heart line or the emotion line is very curved like this, what it shows is that somebody is very expressive. The emotions flow, so it's like a river. So this is what I would call the Mediterranean heart line. So everything's going to come out. The person's going to be shouting and screaming when they're angry. They're going to be crying when they're sad, and they're going to be much more open emotionally. Their heart is going to be worn on their sleeve. They're going to fall in love much quicker, and they're going to be much more bohemian and romantic about life, and their outlook is going to be one of much more driven by this emotional resonance. The challenge and the growth mindset perspective for this heart line comes with really being able to take a deep breath sometimes and go out for a walk for 5 minutes before continuing that discussion, because the emotions are going to flow very strongly with this heart line. So the person will sometimes need to really take a step back and breathe. So hidden emotions, private with feelings, and less connections to people. And then the curved emotion line, as it says here, it's more open and passionate. So I'm going to look at one more line here, and then we're going to start looking at some examples and bringing it all together. And this is the life path line. And I put this one in here because this is the one that most relates to business, really, and it most relates to our relationship to work. So it's the line that runs up the center of the hand, and it's the most variable. So there are many, many, many different variations of this line. So when you're looking at your own hand, you might not see a huge one, but it's basically the line that runs up towards the middle finger. The stronger this line is, the more convictions somebody has with where they're going in life. If somebody has a really strong, rock solid fate line or life path line, it means they know exactly where they're going, what their target is, and where they want to go in life. So here are two examples of contrasting life path lines. Here is an extremely long one that's going right up the center of the hand, and here is a weaker one that's sort of trying to form but hasn't quite done so yet. And remember, all the lines can change. So as our mindset changes, as our beliefs and as our attitude changes, these lines develop. So when someone's got a very strong life path line, it means they've got a very clear direction. So this person I'm looking at here is going to know exactly what it is they want to do. They're going to be very clear about it. They probably know what they want to do from a very young age, and they've got a plan in their head about how they go about it. In terms of what it means for them psychologically, it means that they're going to have quite strong convictions. They're going to know who they are. They're going to know what they believe in, and they're going to have a strong sense of values because their convictions and their target is quite strong. When we look at this person here on the right, because the life path line is a bit more flickery, it means it's much harder for them to know exactly what they want. And as a result, they don't really know who they are. So they might feel like there are a lot of options for them now, and they might feel that they can't quite see their way sort of through the woods at the moment. The path isn't clear for them. And what I would say from a growth mindset perspective is that for the person on the right, it's always about coming back to self. It's about asking the fundamental questions and coming back to first principles of who am I? What is it that makes me tick? What do I find meaningful in life? And what do I value? And when the person applies the growth mindset by asking those questions, that's when, from a chirology, hand analysis perspective, we start to see this line improve, which of course reflects their internal state. So, embracing the growth mindset. We've now got examples, chirology case examples, and I've just got a couple here, which I'm going to pick out, and then I'm going to look at some famous people's hands. So because this is kind of in relation to business as well, I wanted to put this hand up here because everything about this hand speaks about ambition and being the boss. Now, he's got very clear, very strong lines, and he hasn't got too many of them. So when someone's got very clear, very strong, clearly defined lines, it means that their personality, their character is going to be quite strong and quite solidified. They're going to be very direct because you see, they're not wasting a lot of energy. All their energy is targeted into a few amount of lines, which means that if they want something, they're able to go ahead and get it, and they're going to drive to get it. There's a strong life path line that's coming right up from within the lifeline here. So the life path line being strong means that he's going to have very strong convictions, a very strong target, very strong goals, a very strong aim. So he's going to be very focused. So we know already that this is going to be a very determined, very driven, and very focused person. Because, because the life path line is attached to the lifeline, actually, it shows that there's going to be quite a strong sense of duty in his work. And there will be certainly some people here where the life path line is connected to the lifeline. So there's a strong sense of obligation and security that comes from his work. If we look at the fingers, this is the dominant finger. His index finger is much larger relative to the others than what it normally is. And when the index finger is enlarged, remember this relates to the sense of self. So it means that his sense of self and his vision for where he's going is going to be enlarged. So this is going to be a person with a huge amount of ambition. And if we actually look carefully, he's got a whirl on the finger. So he's going to have a very intense individual sense of his own self. So this is going to be somebody who wants to build his own empire, somebody who wants to create a domain that's his, that he can be the boss of. challenges for this person would certainly be being under anyone else's control. And he would have to learn from a growth mindset perspective to be able to yield and be able to be passive in situations, because it could be a very, very domineering type. And just to give one more contrasting example here, look at the lines on this person's hand. They're very different to the last. So this person has got a plethora of lines going all over. So this is high energy. So this is a very fiery hand here. So the lines are kind of like this electric storm. And what this will show and reflect is really what's going on in the person's mind. This person has got long fingers, so they're going to think a lot and they're going to analyze a lot. And they've got all of these lines showing a huge amount of high energy. So this person is going to be buzzing away and always having ideas, always having new things that they're passionate about, excited about. And the amount of energy and enthusiasm that this person will be able to bring is going to be very high. This person is actually an actor, and we can tell what kind of person they would be because of this, what kind of actor they would be. Other lines of note is this is called a Mercury line. Now, a few of you might have a line that's this clear. It runs from the middle of the palm towards the little finger. And what it does is it basically enhances the qualities of the little finger and shows a very strong sense of intuition. So this is going to be somebody who's going to be very intuitive in their approach to things and have a real sense of kind of knowing without knowing. And then the last thing I wanted to draw your attention to here is a simian line. So this person doesn't really have a head and a heart line. They've just got one line that runs across the middle. And this is going to make the person incredibly intense and very, very driven, and kind of even more add to their ruthless intensity that they've got here. So let's apply some of this to some famous people's hands. Now, I just talked about a simian line, so I wanted to go back to it. If we look at Hillary Clinton's hand here, we can see that she doesn't have a heart line at the top, and she doesn't have a headline underneath. What she's got is just one line that runs all the way across. She's got a little line here, but this is something different. When someone has got a simian line like this, it means that their heart line and their headline have fused together to make one. And it means that all of their energy can be put very intensely into one direction. So about 1% of people have got a simian line. And when someone has got a simian line, it means that their levels of focus and intensity are beyond that of anybody else's. The simian line is really quite a complex line, but in a nutshell, it relates to intensity. We can see Robert De Niro also has a simian line. And I've put Robert De Niro in here because the characters he plays are very good examples of a simian line. If you think about him in his most famous roles, such as The Godfather or Raging Bull or Taxi Driver, these are all incredibly intense characters. And this is very symbolic of what the simian line type person is. A simian line person, because they don't have a separate heart line, they're very hard to read, and they always come across as being incredibly calm. But underneath that calm, they have a huge amount of intensity brewing. And if a simian line person wants something, they're going to get it, which is why, even though it's found on 1% of people, it's found much, much higher percentage-wise in people in high-ranking politicians, such as CEOs, or politicians, excuse me, rather than positions. And a simian line is misrepresented, overrepresented in areas of high authority because they're just ruthless in driving their way to get something. So we're going to look at some sort of different figureheads and world leaders and influential people from around the world here and just look at their hands. So this lady is called Aung San Suu Kyi, and she's a Burmese politician. She actually won the Nobel Peace Prize. And she's got a really interesting hand because we can see her emotion line here, and we can see that it's very curved. So we know that her emotion line is the strongest line on her hand. It's bigger than her headline, which means that she's going to be very led by her heart. So in matters that pull her heartstrings, that is going to be where she's going to be governed and where she's going to be led by. So she's going to be very humanitarian from that perspective. But what's very interesting is this wide gap between the headline and the heart line. Now, to have a gap this wide is really quite unusual. She's also got a gap between her lifeline and her headline. So what this means is that this gap can be known as the vision meter. And somebody with a wide gap here and here is going to be extremely open-minded and very able to think outside of the box. And for somebody who may have grown up in a culture that is slightly more oppressive, she would be very able to see past that and be able to see things in a more visionary, progressive, alternative manner. And I've done a lot of hand reading in different countries. And when people have got these kind of very visionary, open-minded, progressive qualities, but they're in a culture that perhaps doesn't allow them to express themselves and be unique and be different, it can be very challenging. The way I would see this in a very positive sense is someone can be incredibly visionary and entrepreneurial because she's not going to see things just from the way that her parents saw them or from the way that her culture has seen things. She hasn't been influenced by that so strongly. She can see things completely uniquely and therefore create something incredibly new and probably want to do something very, very different from what everyone else would have done from who she grew up with. So Camilla Harris here, who's obviously vice president in America. Now, what we can see on her hand is she's got a water type hand. So this is a very, very clear water hand. So what we know right off the bat is that she's going to be very people orientated, and connecting with people and resonating with people is going to be a strong suit for her for that reason. We can see that because of her hand lines, she isn't quite as open and visionary and thinking outside the box as our previous hand we just looked at, because this is not as wide, and also her headline is quite attached to her lifeline, which means that there's going to be a large part of her thinking which will be culturally based. But her hand lines are actually all very nicely balanced. So she's got quite a strong fate line here, which means that she's got a very good sense of where she's going and what she wants to achieve. Her lifeline, her headline, and her emotion line all look quite good. What I would look at from a growth mindset perspective from her is this line that's cutting into her hand here. This is known as an intensity line, and an intensity line can make somebody really busy, and it can give someone like a kind of ants in the pants type syndrome where they want to just keep on doing stuff. But from a growth mindset perspective, it can often mean that there might be a message or something internally that someone might not be quite listening to. And I would always encourage some kind of reflective, meditative practice where somebody can allow their subconscious to kind of come to the forefront and allow whatever messages are happening to be experienced. Nelson Mandela. So the thing that jumps out straight away for me when looking at his hand is his massive thumb. This thumb is enormous. And if you remember, the thumb relates to our willpower. So what we can see with Nelson Mandela is he has got absolutely rock solid willpower. This is sort of beyond Olympic athlete style. And that would, of course, make sense given what he was able to endure. Staying with the fingers, he's also got a slightly short middle finger. This middle finger is short relative to the others. And what the middle finger relates to is authority and structures and rules and regulations. And so with a slightly short middle finger, it means that he's going to be rebellious against all of these things. So what we can see is that just by looking at his fingers, we've got the rock solid, strong-willed rebel is how I would look at his hand. And then Mahatma Gandhi. Staying with the fingers, actually, for Gandhi, the thing that jumps out to me immediately is the enormous size of his little finger. This little finger is towering in terms of its length. The average little finger that I would consider long would come past this crease here. And for Gandhi, his little finger well exceeds that. So the little finger is about communication. So what we've got here is the hand of a man with an ability to communicate on a mass scale. The longer the little finger, the more somebody has an ability to share and spread a message. And we can see exceptional communication, potentially language, potentially writing skills with Gandhi's hand. Okay, and just kind of wrapping it up sort of here with our famous people, we've got Steve Jobs. And I've labeled this hand the innovative mind. Now, if we look at his hand, it's like the hand of a philosopher, because what it is, it's incredibly knuckly. And the more knuckly we get, the more somebody is able to stew and to ruminate. So we can see with his very long knuckly fingers that he's going to be analyzing and constantly thinking and constantly pulling things apart. The longer someone's fingers, the more they specialize. So when I look at people's hands and their fingers are long in proportion to the rest of their hands, it means that they're going to feel most comfortable when they're in an area which allows for constant development, constant growth, and constant specialization. The longer the fingers, also, the more innovative someone becomes. And because he's got a very square palm, this is going to make him extremely technical. So what we've got is a very technical, innovative, analytical, philosophical hand here. And again, from the growth mindset perspective, all of these things can be continually developed and worked on. And there's always a slight flip side, you see, because then somebody with such an intellectual, analytical, technical hand naturally can rise above emotion a little bit. And I would definitely be exploring being able to stay emotionally connected, being able to stay emotionally engaged, and being able to keep that emotional rapport rather than drifting off just into the world of thought. Okay, so a couple more hands to look at here. So this is Princess Diana's hand, and I've included this hand, well, for a number of reasons. It's a very interesting handprint, and there's a lot going on, which we'll look at. So, excuse me, it's a water-type hand, so it's a narrow palm, you see. So when we have a narrow palm, it means that somebody's going to be influenced and affected by their environment. So already this is quite a sensitive, aware hand. The fingers are actually quite long. So the narrow palm means they're going to be influenced by feelings, and then the long fingers means they're going to analyze. So she's going to be great at analyzing people, analyzing feelings. Very curved, expressive heart lines, so very in touch with her feelings and expressing them, and driven by matters of the heart. Her life path line is coming right from the subconscious area of the hand. So she's going to feel like she's on a mission in life that is driven by her subconscious. So this is a unique personal mission that she would have felt she was on. Her index finger is very large. So this is a huge amount of responsibility and control that she feels she's taking. And posturally, the hands are leaning. So if I exaggerate, her fingers are all leaning towards the index finger, which show a sense of pressure and duty, because all the other fingers are leaning towards the finger of control. Everything except the little finger. And the little finger most relates to our sense of intimate relationships, as well as things like communication. So when the little finger is jutting out at an angle like this, it would show somebody who within a relationship might feel a little bit trapped or a little bit isolated, and it would feel that they would want to do things by themselves and that they want their own sense of independence. And then this is the final handprint I want to look at here. And I put it in here because this is an example of where we might see challenges in business and where the growth mindset can really bring everything together to understand how somebody from a hand analysis perspective can work on themselves. So this is a very soft skinned hand. We can see that the lines are very faint and they're quite delicate. So the softer the skin, it actually relates to the nervous system, and the more finely tuned and refined the nervous system is. So this is somebody with a finely tuned, refined nervous system. And in having a finely tuned, refined nervous system, it means that they're going to be very sensitive. So this person is going to be naturally very sensitive, very empathetic, very aware of what's going on, because again, it's a water type hand. They're going to be caring about other people. Challenges that we can see is that the lifeline is slightly ungrounded, which means that this person might feel emotionally a little bit wobbly, not feel as secure as what they would like. And then the life path line isn't that strong either. So they might feel like they're lacking a sense of direction or a sense of their own backbone. And if we were to see this hand in a business sense, the person would have to understand that things like being assertive, things like being competitive, things like hitting sales targets isn't going to come quite so naturally for this person. And they would have to work on that within themselves and equally play towards their strengths, which is quite clearly their ability to empathize, their ability to connect with people, and their ability to be receptive. So I think that's everything for my presentation there. And Alison, would you like to summarize?
Yes, although, Lawrence, we have a few questions in the chat. Do we want to go to the questions?
Yeah, well, absolutely. We've got a question. We've got a questions spot over here. So yeah,
Oh,
of course,
okay.
we're really happy to answer
Why
any
don't-
questions.
Why don't we go to the questions first, and then I'll do the summary.